Hey, what's up, guys? It's Friday, day one of the war in Vietnam. All right, how crazy is it, guys? It's May 1st. This will be our last month together. The countdown's on to the end of the school year. It's been a great 8 months so far. Crazy last month and a half, but I've really enjoyed this first year of teaching my honors kids. You guys have done a phenomenal job. Let's finish up strong. We got the Vietnam War to cover for Unit 17. And then Unit 18 is going to be a little bit different because we're going to look at some stuff from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. So getting a little bit closer to present day with everything. At the beginning of the year, we talked about Mr. Montgomery. They always say we're going to get to present day, but we never do. Hold up my end of the bargain. We're going to get as close as we can to present day. All right? But first, let's talk about the war in Vietnam. So chapters 50, 51, and 52. Hard to believe, we're 50 chapters into our textbook, guys. We're covering like over 500 pages. You know American history at this point. Hopefully you know it a lot more, and it's been a very enjoyable experience for you guys. I remember the first day, I was like, hey, how many of you guys like history? And maybe half of the class raised their hand. And I said, I guarantee you guys will love American history. Now, if I took that same poll, I bet almost everyone in my class would raise their hands. So I told you, I can see the future. I can see from day one all the way up to this point where we'd be, I figure we'd be in school, but obviously we're not. But that's all right. We'll still make do. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty pumped. This is a very fun unit. We talk about a lot of stuff, and it's really important. This is huge. You guys may have grandparents that served in Vietnam. And so this will help you guys better understand their experience of what they went through and what the United States was like during this time. So this history is more relatable. And something I usually did with this when we were in class, and it's too hard for me to do here on this online virtual experiences, there's a tremendous documentary about this. Well, actually, there's two. But the one I would always show was Vietnam in HD. It's made by the History Channel. It has narration, and it follows like 7 different people and their journeys through the Vietnam War, beginning, middle, and end. It chronicles all the major things that we talk about. So if you have the opportunity, usually it's on like History Channel, or you can find it. It'd be a great documentary to watch. Some parts of the episodes that go right along because it has live footage. This is the first war where we have TV crews, we have news reporters on the ground in these battlefields. So this is crazy. This is groundbreaking. This is going to change the way that we view and witness wars. It's different than World War II. It's different than Korea. And it's going to be more along the lines of what we see in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan today. And so there's another documentary made by Ken Burns that just came out that goes a little bit more into the history, so the background, which we will talk about today, of the Vietnam War. It's called The Vietnam Experience. And it's a longer documentary. I think every episode's like 2.5 hours. But it is another phenomenal documentary on the Vietnam War. Just came out last year. So both those are great assets. You can watch those to help you better understand what we were talking about with the war. But without further ado, let's get started. All right. So we're going to talk about a little background. Truman chooses sides in the First Indochina War. The Viet Minh. All right. So we're going to have all these different groups. And I wish I had a whiteboard because I'd usually break it down for you guys of like who's on what side. Well, the Viet Minh are the Vietnamese movement led by Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh is the leader of North Vietnam, or the communist Vietnam. When you think of Vietnam, think of it like Korea. Korea was broken up between North and South. North was communist, South was democratic. Vietnam similar. Vietnam, the North is where the communists are. South is where democracy is. It makes sense because North Vietnam borders what major country? China. So that's where they're getting their influence. That's where their communist influence is coming from, China. It's not coming from the Soviet Union. That's too far away. It's coming from other Asian people and the people of China. So Ho Chi Minh is the leader of the Viet Minh, which are located in North Vietnam. All right. France refused to accept Vietnamese independence and set out to eliminate all the Viet Minh. So the Viet Minh are trying to have an uprising and kick out the colonial power, which is France. All right, France had been in control of Vietnam as part of their territory during imperialism. France drives the Viet Minh out of the city of Saigon, which is the southern capital. Saigon's important. It's what we're going to talk about. throughout the war because the United States is going to go and protect Saigon. When Saigon falls at the end of the war, that's when the North wins. Okay, so we want to protect Saigon at all costs. That's where the Americans are going to station a lot of their troops. This sparked the First Indochina War, which lasted 8 years. You can probably guess the Second Indochina War is actually known as the War in Vietnam, the war that we fought in. But the First Indochina War, we're not involved in. That's France and their territory fighting the North Vietnamese and Ho Chi Minh. Okay, obviously France leaves. The U.S. was paying 80% of the cost of the war in Indochina to stop the spread of communism. We're also fighting in Korea, so we can't fight a war on two fronts. But because of what doctrine did we have to pay for this? The containment doctrine, right? We have said that we're going to contain communism at all costs. So we are financing France to help fight this war. Now, if this is going on the same time as we're fighting in Korea, that's the 1950s. So this is only probably 5-6 years after World War II. Is France really going to send a huge fighting force to go fight the North Vietnamese? No. Their country wouldn't stand for that. They were completely decimated during World War II. So the North Vietnamese know that. They know this is when France is at their extreme weakest. They don't have a navy. They're fighting a small colonial fighting unit, so they can easily win this war, and so they take advantage of this. Obviously, it's not quick. It lasts 8 years because France is more modernized than the North Vietnamese. But one thing the North Vietnamese has that no one really expects is the support and backing of the Chinese people. Now, not the Chinese government. Like, the Chinese government's not going to send their troops in like they did in Korea, but they're going to allow their citizens to go and fight for the Viet Minh. So they can just cross the border, pick up weapons, and go fight for the Viet Minh, and they're not going to say anything about it. But if we ask and we say, hey, China, are you helping the Vietnamese fight this war against us? They can say, well, no, we have no idea what you're talking about. We would not condone any action against the United States. So it's a way for them to covertly fight the United States without actually declaring war on the United States. So Eisenhower considers increased American involvement. France controlled the cities, but the Viet Minh controlled the countryside. And so you would think if we control the cities, or the France controls the cities, that's good. The problem is the peasants fought for the Viet Minh, which is 80% of the total population. Where are the peasants found? In the countryside. There's not too many major cities in Vietnam. It is a third world or a developing country like we talked about in our last unit. So most people are agricultural workers, which means they're all communists or believe in the communist ideas of Ho Chi Minh. Eisenhower gave the domino theory speech on losing Vietnam. So what this means is he's afraid if we lose Vietnam, we're going to lose other countries in Southeast Asia. So if we lose Vietnam, then we lose Cambodia, we lose Laos. Heck, that could go all the way over into India, into Pakistan. We don't want to spread. So you guys all know what dominoes. You line up dominoes, boom, 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 right? You push one, and then they all start falling. It's very similar to like what happened in World War I with the alliance system. One country goes to war against someone else, and then all the dominoes start falling. And so we want to make sure communism doesn't start spreading throughout Southeast Asia and into the Pacific because we want to contain it. France loses the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and after this, they're ready to get out of the war. So they realize it's a losing effort, it's a losing cause. At best, they would divide the country north and south. But really, France is just like, let's cut our losses, let's leave. We're really not getting anything out of Vietnam anyways, resource-wise. We need to focus on rebuilding our home country. The U.S. was just out of the Korean War and not ready to go back into another war, so we can't go in and help France. Even though they ask us, we're not ready. Because can you imagine if the president, Eisenhower, decides to send troops to Vietnam right after Korea, his popular support in the United States would go from an all-time high to an all-time low. People would look at him and say, are you crazy? We just went through a war. We almost got killed. So why are you sending us into another conflict? And so the belief in Eisenhower and what he's trying to do in the 1950s will be completely diminished. The Geneva Peace Conference splits Vietnam into two. Again, very similar to Korea. France and the Viet Minh began talks in Geneva. France wanted some territory still. They just don't want to completely give up Vietnam. The Viet Minh wanted the whole country, obviously. you have a revolution, you just don't say, well, we're going to have a revolution to win a third of the country. You say, we want a revolution to completely control this country and make it what we want. China and the Soviet Union put pressure on the Viet Minh to compromise because they realized if they don't compromise, one country might get involved and stick their nose into business there. It really may not belong, which is the United States. So they say, hey, if you don't want an escalated war with the United States, just compromise. Look what we did in Korea. We compromised in Korea. The North is communist. The South is democratic. Everything's fine. We still have influence. All right? France and the Viet Minh signed the Geneva Accords. Vietnam was split along the 17th parallel. The South is democratic. The North is communist. And as France left Vietnam, the United States entered as the one that is going to try and rebuild and control South Vietnam. Hence why we are part of the Vietnam War. So far, when you look at this, and you look at the setup of Vietnam, you're looking at Korea, right? You're looking at everything that happened in Korea. And so you can see why this is probably going to lead to another conflict, just like the war in Korea. So we look at this map real quick. Vietnam, after the Geneva Accords in 1954, you can see the 17th parallel is literally almost right in the middle of the country, splitting it in half. You see South Vietnam with Saigon all the way at the bottom tip, and then you see North Vietnam and Hanoi all the way at the top. So when we fight this war and you have Hanoi all the way up here, and you have Saigon all the way down here, there's going to be a lot of fighting in this middle ground, all right, really close to the 17th parallel. And if we want to take over North Vietnam, we have to get all the way up to Hanoi. My problem is Hanoi is right next to China. So if we get all the way up into Hanoi, then we have to worry about China thinking that we're going to invade them, and then they would come and join the fight. If the North Vietnamese and the Viet Minh get all the way down close to Saigon, you have other countries like Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand that are right there that can be taken over, and then here's that domino theory, all right? Now, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand play a huge role in the war. They don't get involved. They don't fight. They're small, developing third world countries. But they have this set of tunnels known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail that we're going to talk about later, which allow the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong to be extremely successful. So, the Gulf of Tonkin incident kind of gets the United States upset and gets us towards war. For months, the North was sending weapons and supplies south to the Viet Cong over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So, who's the Viet Cong? The Viet Cong are the communists that live in the south. So you have the 17th parallel right here. You have the Viet Minh that live in the north. They're the part of Ho Chi Minh's group. Then you have the VC, or the Viet Cong, that are communists that live below the 17th parallel. They are the rebel fighters that are going to fight this guerrilla war against the South Vietnamese. All right? Well, how do I get supplies past the 17th parallel? Because it's completely guarded. It's a DMZ, demilitarized zone. Well, I go into the neighboring countries, Cambodia and Laos, through this Ho Chi Minh Trail, because it's built by Ho Chi Minh, and I am going to get my supplies to the Viet Cong. The Ho Chi Minh Trail are paths and tunnels that pass through the terrain of eastern Laos and Cambodia. The North Vietnamese fired machine guns and torpedoes at a U.S. destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, the Gulf of Tonkin is up towards the north, up by Hanoi. So they're saying, hey, why isn't an American ship up close to our northern capital? LBJ chooses not to retaliate, but send a message to Hanoi, and he says, hey, if this incident happens again, and you attack an American ship, then we will be forced to retaliate, and it's going to escalate us closer to a war, all right? So the first shots of the Vietnam War are fired by the North Vietnamese at the United States. Now, should the United States be in North Vietnamese waters? We're just trying to keep peace, all right? We're not actively aggressing them. But the North sees our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin as a threat to their way of life. At the same time, should they be sending supplies into the Viet Cong? No. So you can already see where there's distrust building between these two areas. Stay tuned for part 2. It's going to get even more intense, all right? Be right back.